Hey everybody, so I figured I'd do a bit of a late night stream. Why the hell not, right? I mean, we're all here, we're all sitting around. It makes all the sense in the world. And, I just had an article that came out tonight because it's in, again, a British publication, Unheard, and they publish, for whatever reason, at midnight British Standard Time, if that's the name of the time zone. British Standard. Yeah, British Standard Time, which means that being in the not Eastern, being in the Mountain Time zone right now, it comes out in a reasonable at a reasonable hour where you can sort of publicize it the night before. So that's what I've generally done with this publication. And if you follow this channel, you know that I don't like to just willy nilly spout off about any topic under the sun, although I do that sometimes. I kind of violate my own half hearted rule. If I'm going to be commenting, I like to sort of tether it to a written piece that I've done so my thoughts are organized and so I'm not just ranting and raving and cracking jokes like so many YouTubers, quote unquote, uh, very conspicuously do. I just finished watching one. I don't know why I even wasted my time. Um, where it's just pure reactive punditry, and people actually sit and watch it. I can watch cable news for that. So I mean, this whole genre of YouTube content production, where it's just some doofus sitting there rattling off takes. I don't know. I don't care for it much. But then again, I don't know that I'm necessarily immune to that temptation. So maybe I'm a total hypocrite. But I'm just going to tweet out the link here. Hold on one second. And as you're waiting, please enjoy the music. Okay, this is taking a little longer than expected because I want to make sure I include the link to the article in the description box prior to beginning my discussion of it, which I often forget to do. And then I have to tweet it, and it's a whole process here. Life is tough. It's hard out here for a pimp. Okay, good. Hope you enjoyed that immensely. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, which was like off the charts. All right, so this article I have out in Unheard today slash tomorrow, and it's an attempt on my part to sort of synthesize what I have inferred to be the various strains of political thought and action that have congealed to give rise to the protests in Portland, where, as you may know, I spent about a week. And I want to make it clear up front that in any large and unwieldy protest movement, there's obviously going to be competing or overlapping or orthogonal or contradictory strains of thought and tactical philosophies and modes of behavior. So I don't want to generalize too flippantly, because people have different approaches to things, and if it's true, as has been estimated, that this is the largest protest movement of all time, then it's not going to be monolithic. Um, However, the reason why this activity in Portland has taken on the character that it has, where you have 63 something like that continuous nights of protest, where you had these federal forces deployed at one point to stymie the more aggressive action undertaken by some of the protesters, is because there's a current running through the Portland protest that is sort of particular to it, that you might not see in other places. I actually think it's sort of particular to the Pacific Northwest, or at least Seattle and Seattle and Portland, although you probably see also some of this in the Bay Area, like San Francisco, Oakland, etc. And also other scattered places throughout the country, which is that there's a overt, avowed contingent. It's more or less kind of dominating each night's events that are ideological, insurrectionary anarchists. They don't try to hide it. I hope that the inevitable criticism that I'm sure some people will level is that I'm making something up, or I've just fabricated this notion that there are consciously anarchistic insurrectionists who are highly active in Portland. I so wish that they could have just joined me one night last week after midnight. After midnight, we gonna find the anarchists, because the anarchists are very much abundantly blatant in their presence, especially toward the end of the evening, so to say, each night in Portland. And they're prepared. People are asking where I am. I'm in Canyon City, Colorado right now. So I'm ever so incrementally moving my way back east. But I wanted to take a different route than I had ever taken before in my previous cross country trips. So right now I'm in Canyon City, Colorado, which was actually a fairly spectacular drive scenery wise, from Grand Junction this morning to Canyon City. So if you have never done that, it's not the quote easiest drive. There's a lot of zigs and zags, and cell phone service drops out, and a lot of making your way up and down mountains and such. But in terms of the scenery, it's nice. Anyway, you're going to have people denying, for a variety of reasons, that anarchists play a central role in the Portland protests. And to me, it's just bizarre, because it's not like they're trying to hide it. If you watch that clip from last week when my phone got snatched, that was all initiated by a guy in full gear. When I say full gear, I mean, body armor, full mask, helmet, and giant shield, demanding that I obey his command to cease recording. And of course, I declined to obey that command. But if you look at the shield that that gentleman is wielding, it's got a huge anarchist A emblazoned on it. So it's not like that's a secret as to what it connotes. In Seattle, when the Chaz was still underway, it was overtly anarchistic. And when I was in Seattle, some of the remnants from the Chaz who kind of hung around told me that a lot of them had made their way south to Portland to continue agitating. I don't even use the word agitating to necessarily be derogatory. They're engaged in agitation. Agitation can be a neutral term. And yet, so the guy with the shield and the anarchist A, who instigated the quote confrontation with me, which was one of countless. And you go there after midnight, and there are just brigades of people in the full black clad, full garb, from shields to body armor to face masks to gas masks to even I saw some of them have their own communications, specialized communications devices and like radio systems. So not phones, like radio system. I don't know how you would even necessarily characterize it, like a shortwave radio or something. I don't know, not a shortwave. They had like a radio system set up to amongst themselves to coordinate. They were engaged in insurrectionary activity. I mean, they were firing mortars. Yeah, I guess it was a walkie-talkie, but I don't know. Maybe it was. I guess it was a walkie-talkie. You're right. It's funny. I hadn't thought of the concept of a walkie-talkie in a long time because they're kind of becoming obsolete. But they were using some kind of walkie-talkie system, which is not like the most complicated technology in the world, but still. And they're engaged. They were engaged clearly in coordinated insurrectionary activity, and they were anarchists. They proclaimed that. And so, accepting that premise that there are anarchists present at the center of the Portland protest. Okay, so I just had a troll comment saying, "Hey, Mikey, wow, funny. Why don't you talk about conducting fake interviews? What interviews have I conducted that are fake, troll? Name me an example." Many of my interviews I just post on the channel. I have never confabulated an interview ever. That's like the cardinal sin of journalism. So you got a little bit of a rise out of me, troll. Congratulations, because even to suggest that is just preposterous. Try to prove it, bitch, and then come back to me. If you get here, I'll give a challenge to that troll. If you can prove that I faked any interview ever, going back not just since the George Floyd protest, go back 10 years, 11 years. If you can prove that I ever faked an interview, meaning I fabricated an interview out of whole cloth, I will delete all my social media and I'll never do journalism again, and I'll give you $5,000. How about that? If you can prove it, which you can't, because it never happened. Anyway. Going back to the whole issue of the presence of anarchists at the Portland protests, if you just accept the basic factual premise that they are there, that they are behind a lot of the lion's share of the agitation, and that it's because of them, largely, that the protests have lasted as long as they have, although my understanding is that they've decreased somewhat in intensity since the federal forces withdrew a bit in terms of their visibility. They're not totally gone from Portland, but you don't have the tactical squad out each night as you had last week and the week before. Um, but the protests are still underway. I mean, and they liken it, meaning a speaker at one of the rally portions of this protest on that I was there, likened it to the Montgomery bus boycotts, which lasted over a year. And those are the historically elevated terms in which they see themselves. So, if that's the case, then you would expect this to go on in perpetuity. And there's a strategic logic for them to carrying it on in perpetuity because they've had a very outsized impact discursively. Like they elicited the mayor, Ted Wheeler, to finally come out and join the protest and declare solidarity with him and even get tear gassed in a display of kind of communal again solidarity. Um, you've had Democrats, sort of normie establishment Democrats, making common cause with the Portland protesters. They describe it as kind of your standard, benign, peaceful protesters. Meanwhile, here they are, where many of them, a huge percent, like a significant percentage, are committed insurrectionary anarchists. So it's this bizarre sort of fusion of political tendencies where, because these anarchists have put themselves at the forefront of Black Lives Matter and of opposing the fascism, allegedly, of Trump, that makes inevitable that you will have more conventional, resistance-minded, normie Dems exalting them as allies and who need their sympathy and support. And so that's actually, a notable and important accomplishment on the part of the anarchists. In a way, you have to admire them because they've had a great impact. Clearly, a lot of the insurrectionary riotous activity that happened after the George Floyd killing in late May, when you had the nationwide riots, was sparked or instigated by ideological anarchists. I don't have a lick of doubt about that. And then others latch on, others maybe who don't have a specific political motive join in the pandemonium once there's a vacuum created and there's no police control of certain areas. But a lot of them, I am confident, were anarchists based on my observations around the country. And, I don't want to fall into this sort of low IQ right-wing habit that you see in sort of the more infotainment type sectors of the conservative media, where they kind of impute to Antifa this idea that is this centralized command structure where there's somebody in a headquarters somewhere calling the shots and like deploying brigades of Antifa foot soldiers to different locations. No, that's not how it works. But is there some coordination amongst the anarchists? Yeah, I mean, I could observe it walking around. I could see them communicating with one another, telling each other where to go, what needs are present at a certain time. And so I think it's worth striving to be precise about what you're describing. And when I say insurrectionary behavior, I mean, they did spend all night firing mortars at a federal courthouse. And mortars are a type of commercial firework. But I'm sorry, if you get hit with a large commercial firework at relatively close range, that's going to cause quite a bit of damage. That's not going to be a pleasant experience. That's a violent attack. It simply is. And no, they hurl all kinds of other... In Portland, they were hurling all kinds of objects at the federal forces and the Portland Police Bureau, and et cetera. And, this doesn't necessarily justify the response by the federal forces to indiscriminately tear gas everybody, I don't think that was particularly necessary most of the time. I got tear gassed myself one night quite badly, and it's not as though I was rioting. Um, However, it's in calling it insurrectionary behavior. I'm just being descriptive. I mean, they want to overthrow. They're saying they want to overthrow the system, the American governmental system. I mean, they're not shy about that. That is their ultimate goal. You walk around in Portland in any given night, there's people with signs with the anarchist A saying revolution doesn't come through voting or asking for it. That's a so what they're calling for is an overthrow of the system by way of a diversity of tactics. And if you know this, if you're familiar with the anarchist literature or philosophy, good for you. But it's taken on a new significance now because it's been situated under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter. They appropriate the nomenclature of Black Lives Matter to give themselves moral legitimacy in the eyes of the wider public, including the political and media class, especially normie Dems, who say to themselves, okay, BLM, we're on board with that. There might be a few, bad, there might be a few like bad actors here and there, but in terms of BLM, that's our bread and butter. So we're gonna come down on the side of them. And so the anarchists have actually cleverly mainstreamed their philosophy under the rubric of BLM. And they're also sort of savvy about public presentation because in Portland, which is a majority, it's an overwhelmingly white city. They know that if they had all white people calling this, in the most public visible roles, that wouldn't necessarily reflect well on them in terms of wider public perceptions. So what do? At each rally portion of the night's festivities, they appoint black speakers to speak. So the tiny minority of people there who are black are made to speakers. And it's successful. So, if I'm telling you things that you already know about insurrectionary anarchism, all right, but realize that it's reached a new phase of potency in terms of the political effect that it's having. It's potentially more mainstream now than it's ever really been. Because with Occupy, which I was fairly intimately involved in terms of journalistic involvement, was that sort of initiated by anarchists? Yeah, but I don't know. Something about Occupy, to me, in retrospect, just seems more ecumenical, seems more inclusive, seems less divisive along sort of petty culture war lines. And so it was easier to marginalize. It was easier to castigate as just some kind of radical fringe. Whereas if you are showing up to BLM protests to advocate your anarchistic worldview, that's going to be easier. That's going to be much harder to dismiss, given the moral stature that BLM commands in the eyes of the political and media class. So there's a difference there in terms of the potential for this to be mainstreamed. I remember first coming across the concept of Antifa during Occupy, when there was a fringe group within Occupy who were Antifa before people really were even familiar with the term. But now, because they can kind of position themselves in opposition to Trump in support of BLM, they're insinuating themselves far more uh, strongly into the mainstream of American political thinking. So it is worth evaluating their ideas a little bit more carefully. And that's what I attempted to partly do that in this unheard piece. And I saw a commenter mention like what small business would want to go into Portland right now. Yeah, I'm sure there will still be small businesses going into Portland, but I mean, if you saw my like little video tour during the day in Portland, you'll know that much of the downtown area has been boarded up for weeks. Um, you have very low visibility on the part of the Portland Police Bureau right now. I don't know that I saw a single officer on foot patrol anywhere, and I was there for a week. Uh, it was similar actually in that way to Minneapolis, St. Paul, where I likewise saw even fewer police anywhere. They just sort of retreated. Um, but yeah, a lot of stuff in Portland's been boarded up. A lot of, and you still have sort of small scale riots happening fairly frequently. Like I went to this place, and I mentioned this in the piece, Voodoo Donut, a popular independent donut store. And yes, I did get a donut, and it was fantastic. I shouldn't get the donut because it's not a very healthy snack, but I did get it, um, and you know you can understand why it's a famous donut shop. It's good donut. They're good donuts, and yet not this past weekend, but the weekend before, the Voodoo Donuts windows had been smashed, and the entire place was boarded up. This is like a almost like a left wing donut shop where they sell like vegan maple cream donuts. Um, you know, a lot of these small businesses were already under huge strain because of the pandemic, and then you layer all this on top of it, and yeah, you're getting to a very in America writ large. Um, Somebody says keto works, Mike. LOL. Yeah, I know. I actually had I did keto in 2017, and I lost a lot of weight. Um, so if you go look at photos of me from early 2017, I look like I don't look particularly good. And then I lost a fair amount of weight. I'm not back up to that levels now, but I do need to lay off the donuts. Um, yeah, so I mean, we're in a climate now for small businesses that is very severe. And yet, at the same time, you have a huge amount of profits going to the major big box retailers like Walmart. Obviously, Amazon is making a killing. And if you think that the riots and such don't have an impact on any of this, um, I think you're just delusional. Um, you know, Portland is not quite as bad in terms of the scope of the riots as other places that I saw. But even just that past weekend, Voodoo Donuts gets smashed up, and then they have to board up the entire place. And when places are boarded up, it's not the most enticing atmosphere to attract customers. Um, yeah, so that commenter I think was onto something. Um, Another interesting dynamic that I came across in Portland was bafflement on the part of select people that the Portland Police Bureau had become such an object of animosity. Given that the Portland Police Bureau, while I'm sure not perfect, while I'm sure having plenty of problems as with any police department, has, over the course of 20 years or so, or maybe even more, probably more like 30 years now, made vigorous attempt to diversify, to become, quote, progressive, um, and to institute all number of policies that make them sort of distinct from other types of police departments that you see elsewhere in the country. As just an example of that, if you look at the Portland Police Twitter account right now, it's an officer happily wearing an LGBT pride flag face mask, which is like probably not the type of face mask you're going to see for the, I don't know, Amarillo, Texas Police Department. And I was talking to one longtime Portland-based activist who told me that this person has a friend in the Portland Police Bureau who is a black lesbian woman with children who, by the logic of these protesters, will be implicated in their chants. And some of their chants include A, C, A, B, all cops are bastards. Okay, so if that's your attitude, that all cops are inherently bastards because they're part of a white supremacist fascistic system, then what does that say about the black lesbian woman who decides to join the Portland Police Bureau because she wants to make the department more reflect her in her community? That's another thing that's been sort of lost in all this discussion. I mean, many big city police departments over the past 20 years or so have made a very strenuous effort to diversify. Look at the graduating classes in the NYPD or the LAPD. Um, there are at least 50% non-white, probably more now in those two cities in particular. Um, but I mean, is every single non-white person who joins a police department just automatically just tarnished by their association with white supremacy, or maybe do we need a different framing to understand the problems associated with policing, which are real, and I don't deny for a second. I've spent a lot of time in the past on the predatory behavior of American policing and the problems with the police culture. But when you put this when you apply this frame onto it, it seems to obscure more than it reveals. Really, all cops are bastards. Every single one of them are just bastards, meaning they're irredeemable. That's just not my experience, and I feel like it's reductive, and maybe it makes for an emotionally satisfying chant at a rally or a protest, but it doesn't actually get to the core of the issues at hand if you want to improve the quality of life for people who may be subject disproportionately to the more predatory aspects of contemporary policing. Um, anyway, so there's some more observations and snippets of reportage in this piece. So take a look at that when you get a chance. I'm now going to scan some of my super chats. I'm sure if Sparky is here, if he's not asleep, that he will have left a super chat. There he is, Sparky, my man. Sparky says, unrest is rooted in strange bedfellow globalists, robber barons, and communists who share the common goal of a borderless world run by a central authority. Okay, I'm just going to take that as a statement. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out. There used to be a way where I could access the super chats within the YouTube, but I don't. I should have pulled that up ahead of time. I apologize if I missed your super chat. I will find it. Yeah, there's a super chat history thing. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, okay, I found it. All right. So, Krillin876 asks, any chance you'll get back on Tucker? You know, stay tuned. It's I'm always available. It's not my I'm not the producer of the show, so they know how to find me. Um, Kirnoff asks, have you talked to Tim Pool about these insurrectionists? Tim has dealt with them from the Occupy Wall Street days. Um, no, I haven't. If he wants to talk, okay. And I had a bird's eye view of Occupy Wall Street myself. So, I know that he was involved. That's how I first became familiar with him. Um, but I don't need to, you know, ask him for exclusive insight because I was there. STFU FFS says Antifa didn't succeed. The left decided to side versus Trump in every case. Remember Pelosi sided with the Sparkle to win the MS-13. Did she? Okay, I need to look that up. Um, all right, so thank you for those incredibly insightful super chats. Um, I will. Okay, so this troll who has succeeded in getting a rise out of me again describes me as a fake journalist. All right, troll. Um, do I need to put together a master document of everything I've done over the course of 10 years that obviously qualifies as journalism? Even if you don't like it, even if you disagree with how I characterize things or what I choose to devote my attention and energy to journalistically, I don't. I find it odd that so many people are so insistent on saying you're not a journalist. Like journalist is not some kind of morally elevated or sacrosanct status. Um, Journalism is accessible to pretty much everybody. Um, so if you say like not a journalist and not and is not synonymous to me with like you're a bad person, it just doesn't even make sense. It's incoherent. Um, if you don't like what I do journalistically, that's certainly your prerogative. But this obsession with saying I'm not a journalist is just, you know, whatever. I mean, I just had a journalistic article out today, so you can dislike it, you can have criticisms of it, but it's just bizarre. All right. One final super chat here from David Sterry. Do you get a sense that protesters are in dialogues or otherwise making progress toward their goals, or their goals becoming clearer over time? It's hard to say, again, with such a diffuse and multifaceted movement. Like I said, if the goal of the committed anarchists is to make their ideology more mainstream, that I think they are making serious progress toward that goal, given how they've kind of snuck it in under the auspices of BLM, which again, it's sort of a brilliant move tactically. Um, in terms of other goals, I think just having become the largest protest movement in U.S. history, assuming that's true, is itself accomplishment of a goal, and automatically kind of imbues you with a certain moral status that then enables people who even have the most tangential association with the movement to make demands and to move public dialogue in a direction that they find most fortuitous. So you're never going to have like there's nobody who has the authority. This is sort of a paradox during Occupy. There was never some kind of like central authority who could issue a list of demands. There were certain people who kind of claimed they could do that, but it's not like a political party or something. It's not like there's not like an organizational infrastructure where you could have a clear cut set of demands that you could check them off once they've been accomplished. It's sort of like the protesting is in a way a goal unto itself. It's self-actualizing. It gives people a sense of communal bonding. It makes for it fulfills a social purpose, even in you might say a spiritual purpose. So I think it's a mistake to think of the protests purely as being goal oriented. I think a lot of them are simply about self actualization in the protests themselves and this kind of social upheaval that the protests bring about, or, or are the goal in their own right. Sparky mentions this 1996 Telecom Act again, which I'm familiar with that act. STFU FFS says, "We know your bona fides. Don't feed the troll." Yeah, I guess I shouldn't feed the troll, but uh, I have to give the troll credit because he did provoke me successfully. So I gotta respect that on some level. And Bart Tally adds that I like your work. Don't feed the trolls. You know, trolling has its utility if it's deployed in the right direction, which is like, I guess if it has utility, then maybe it's not trolling. Maybe it's we need a different term because it's constructive. Maybe can prompt some substantive discussion, or maybe kind of penetrate through the sort of bubble that certain people operate in. If they're just kind of trolled viciously, um, they're sort of dislodged from their perch of smug self-assuredness. But sometimes trolling is just that. It's just nihilistic nonsense. But I guess I vindicated the troll's tactic. And it's my fault for having my comments roll on my screen as I'm trying to maintain a train of thought. All right, everybody, it's getting late. I'm going to retire for the evening. And stay safe, stay cool.